What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Dado here. For those of you who are new, welcome. I hope you stay. Today I'm continuing work on my Triumph Scrambler build, and I'm gonna try to get to the bottom of why this thing won't fire up. Now, in the last episode, you guys saw me take a bunch of stuff apart. I found a whole bunch of problems, and in this episode we are going to be taking the right side case cover off, and we are going to be installing this ignition sensor. Essentially, it's a spark generator that Triumph uses to send a signal to the ignition. Now, this bike has fuel but no spark, and the coils tested good, although I do have a brand new set of coils. Now, it's a common problem in these Bonnevilles for the spark generator to completely cut out and die, or you know, people have intermittent ignition issues, or the thing will misfire and then it'll die. And some guys even keep them in stock or in their toolbox as extras because they go out so often. Now, there's a couple of different sensors you can get. You can get a knockoff, you can get an aftermarket sensor, or you can get an OEM. I've heard a lot of mixed reviews, so I ended up going with the OEM Triumph piece that I found. Now, first order of business before I get started is draining the oil. I did get the oil up to the proper level because this thing had almost 4 quarts of extra oil in it. I'm not really sure why. I'm assuming that the previous owner really didn't have a clue what he was doing. But I have to drain all that out. Now, I didn't put fresh oil in there because I wanted to get it running first. But now that we're taking this cover off, we're probably gonna have a lot of oil seeping out. So I'm gonna take the filter off, drain the oil, and also make sure that my ignition key, which is on this side here, is completely out, because I don't want to accidentally turn things on or try to crank over the bike. Now, I'm going to pull the oil filter out, which is right underneath here, and we also have the oil drain plug, which is right down here. And once the oil is out and everything's nice and clean, then we can start taking this cover apart, and I'll show you where the spark generator is located. Now, I already took 4 quarts out of this bike that was extra, and I just drained about 4 quarts out, and look how nasty this oil is. It smells like pure gasoline, which is not a good thing at all. My guess is it's either running super rich or there's something wrong with the carburetors. So he did have the carbs apart. I think he tried to clean them when the bike wouldn't start instead of troubleshooting it. So he might have put that together wrong when he reassembled it. I don't know. He didn't really give me a lot of information, and he kind of pretended like he didn't know what he was doing, or at least I thought he was pretending. So the good thing is it does have compression and it does turn over freely. It's not bound up. I don't see any metal shavings, which is also a good thing. Once that's done draining, I'm going to pull the oil filter, and then we'll get cracking on this case cover. I'm really excited to see what's inside. Maybe something's broken. I don't know. Now, anytime that you take any cases apart, make sure that you replace the case gaskets. I got the OEM Triumph right-hand side case gasket. On some motorcycles, they just use a special kind of sealant, like a Honda Bond or Yamaha Bond or Ducati Bond. Some use a silicone type gasket maker. On some motorcycles, you just clean the case cover and the case itself, and then you just put on a bead of silicone or a gasket maker that's recommended by the manufacturer, and you just seal it up that way. So in my case, there is a gasket right there. So once we get this apart, we'll be able to see exactly what it looks like inside. The oil's done draining for the most part, and I got everything cleaned up really nicely. These are 8mm here, and before I take them off, if you guys have followed my previous videos, you'll know that I like to keep track of where each bolt goes. In some cases, all puns intended, some of the bolts will be different lengths, and you don't want to screw that up. If you put a bolt that's too short, it may pull the threads out of the block. If you put bolts that are too long, they may bottom out and then jack up the threads. So what I like to do is take a piece of cardboard. I won't be using this, but I'll take a piece of cardboard just like this. I'll draw the case exactly how it is here, and then I'll put little dots there and I'll poke them with a screwdriver. And then whenever I take a bolt out, I put it in the same location. Also, there are little ears that are located on different parts of the cover. There's one there, one here on the side, and one right there. And those are used to remove the cover. You just tap over here and here and here lightly to get the case removed. You don't want to pry where the case touches the block, because you might mar the surface and then it's not going to seal there again. I like to shock the case with a rubber mallet. That usually helps get things loose, but in case that fails and things have been caked on or baked on, you just tap it here and get it right off. Let's get the sucker off. There you have it. I said I wasn't going to use this piece of cardboard, and I ended up using this piece of cardboard. Just make sure that you get the gasket out prior to drilling, because you know, you might drill through the gasket. So that's exactly how that goes. They do appear to be all the same size, but just to be safe. Also, a lot of people say to me, well, if they're all the same size, why do you continue to put them in the same pattern? One thing that you have to understand being a mechanic is a lot of these threads here were in a specific place. So they each had their own individual threaded hole. Now let's say one of the mechanics that work on this over tightened this bolt here and the threads pulled, or these threads got jacked up. If you put this in a different hole, it may strip the threads in that part, and vice versa. If you mix them up where they're not supposed to go, you might have problems down the road, because I'm just assuming that these were torqued down properly, but you should never assume. Here's the bolts. They're all out. I'll end up cleaning these threads up before I put them back in there. I'm excited to get the case off. And there you have it, guys. Here we have the charging system with the stator. The stator is attached right to the cover, and there's a little grommet here where the wires pass through. You can see the old gasket. It's going to be a pain to get this thing completely off because it's dried. Here you have a spark generator located right here, and you have the lead running down through here and out of the case. It's really simple how this works. When the flywheel spins, it generates electricity, which charges the battery with the stator right here. Super simple on that part. You have these little nubs sticking out right here, and every time they pass underneath this spark generator, the magnetic pickup sends a signal through this wire and tells the bike when to fire each cylinder. I'm going to clean up a couple of these areas here, just make sure that we don't get any silicone like this down into the oil pickup, and kind of just take a really good look and look for wears and stuff. It actually looks like somebody had replaced this at one point, and I'm not sure if this is a factory flywheel or if it's been replaced, but it looks brand new, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. Every time that I work on anything mechanical or even with electronics, when I take things apart, I look at everything very, very carefully. I look at heat marks, cracks, wear points, stripped pieces, missing stuff, loose things. So whenever I'm inside the case, especially, and there's all these moving components, you got to make sure that everything is kosher and good to go. Now the electricity is generated here at the stator. The stator is permanently fixed to the cover, and then the flywheel turns with the crank here, generating the electricity. Now the voltage that comes out of here is a lot higher than we need, and then we have a regulator rectifier which is mounted right in front of the bike here, which regulates that voltage down to what we need is like 13.5 or 14 volts that charges up the battery. Once again, real simple concept, and a lot of these charging systems are very similar on most bikes. Next line of business is remove the old spark generator and install the new one, clean the gasket off the case and the cover, and then reinstall the new gasket. All right, I took the sensor out and I pulled a wire out as well. Now there's a metal clamp that's held in by this bolt right there. I had to pull that out in order to pull the wire out. I just have this temporarily sitting here because I don't want to disconnect it all. You have to fish the wire out. It's kind of like in the frame, and it goes all the way up in there, goes all the way around underneath the frame here, and then comes up to right below where the bracket is for the fuel tank. And there it is right there. Don't forget your high strength red Loctite before you put those bolts back in there. There are 2 pins. One's located right there. One is right there at the bottom. And you use that not only to hold your gasket in place, but also guide you to put this on the right way, because there's dimples here and also here. And those dimples fit where those little metal dowels are, or the pins. So I put the gasket on. Before I did that, I put some Honda Bond right here. I'm sure Triumph calls for a specific proprietary Triumph formula, adhesive or gasket maker. I've been using Honda Bond on many motorcycles for many years without any issues. I actually started using it on cars when I used to own a bunch of Hondas, and it's never failed me. Always make sure that you're looking at manufacturer specific brands and what it calls for, but you can always look at the contents of the adhesives or the gasket makers and see if it's something comparable. Most of them are pretty much the same thing. I put all my bolts in the case already. That way when I line everything up, they're already in there. The dowel should really help along. And some of the bolts sometimes fall out, but that shouldn't be an issue here. So I'm gonna pop the case on and then tighten everything down properly. One thing I wanted to mention is essentially that's a huge magnet. So whenever you're sliding this assembly on there, it wants to suck it in and pull it all together. Just make sure that everything's lined up prior to doing that so you don't jack up your gasket. When you're installing these bolts, make sure you tighten them in a cross pattern. So I always start at 12 o'clock, move down to 6 o'clock, then work like 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock, then work my way around, okay? Never use an impact unless you have experience. I use this literally to just snug these down to save a little bit of time. This is very light and fast. I just barely put those in there. I don't recommend you do it if you don't have experience, because you can strip out bolts very easily. After using this to very lightly snug them in, I use a torque wrench to torque these bolts down in a specific pattern according to the manufacturer specs that they give in the manual. Next up, make sure that the oil drain plug is tightened and that you pre-fill your oil filter with oil, because it does sit upside down, and you want to make sure that whenever you crank the bike over, the oil pump does not run dry. Here we have Motul 4T10W40 oil, and I'm using a high flow filter. It's a premium filter for this bike. However, I have a feeling that I may have to do another oil change prior to really riding this, because something is up with the fuel system. Now, I was cranking the engine. I disconnected the ignition wires. I was cranking the engine with everything off to see if I get spark. What I did off camera was I hooked up the spark generator outside of the bike directly to the plug here before I fished everything through and checked for spark, and guess what? We have spark, which is awesome. That makes me super happy. And then while I was cranking it, I noticed that fuel was dripping actually fairly fast out of the oil pan. I don't recommend that you crank or even start the motorcycle up with no oil in it. However, I had the spark plugs disconnected, and cranking it is totally fine, especially when you just drained the oil out of it. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, or you think you're going to cause some damage, don't do it. Now, when I did that, a bunch of fuel poured out, and I noticed that it was coming straight from the carburetor. I do believe that the previous owner did take the carburetors off, thinking that's what was causing the bike not to start and run. And I feel like I'm going to have a lot of work on my hands rebuilding and adjusting those. Now, I planned on taking them apart anyways. The fuel doesn't look too healthy in the fuel tank, and I also have a jet kit that allows me to run air filter pods and also a straight pipe exhaust, essentially. So I am going to attempt to run the bike just the way it is to see if there's any issues and to troubleshoot things. Once I get everything fixed, I'll drop the oil filter, do the change all over again, and then we should be kosher. It's a lot of work, but it's so worth it. Next up, I'm gonna fill up the oil filter with that oil. Put the oil filter up there. It takes about 4 quarts of 10W40. I'm gonna fill that up, and we're gonna see if we can get it started. All right, the filter is now pre-filled with oil all the way to the top. Sometimes you have to wait a little bit until all the air bubbles come out and the paper element inside fills up. As you've noticed already here, they pre-lubed the gasket, which is really nice. I have a filter wrench ready, and another thing I wanted to mention is I always put my initials and the date of the oil. Sometimes I put the mileage on there as well, but this is for me, and I know that I'll be changing it fairly soon. Now, if you watched one of my previous videos, you would have seen that I bought a replacement cap, but it's not just a cap, it's liquid-filled oil temp gauge. Now, this unit here is finished in black, and it will accompany the case color really nicely, and it'll look a lot better than that does right there. So once I'm done filling up the oil, I'm gonna put this sucker in there. All right, everything's done. I installed the oil temperature gauge. It looks so much nicer than the factory plug, I believe. And the one nice thing about this unit is you can rotate the top, and that way, you know, you can have it tilted. Depends on how you're looking at it, on the bike or off the bike. All right, keys on. You don't have to hold a clutch in this, so I'm just gonna walk around the other side, and I'm not gonna have the choke out either. I'm just gonna have that in. We do have to make sure that the fuel is turned on. That's in the on position now. So here we go, guys. Ow. That was a really bad misfire, and it sounded like a gunshot. So if it doesn't start, the neighbors are still gonna be pissed because it sounded like a gunshot. Well, I'm gonna try to start it. Let me pull the choke out a little bit, and we'll give it another whirl here. No way. The bike runs. I am so happy right now. I'm gonna open up my doors and I'm gonna run this for a little bit, just because. I'm gonna get it warmed up. I'm excited. This should be interesting. It's freezing out. It's like 42 degrees or something like that, but I don't really care. So let's go. I'm gonna let it run a little bit, put the choke out. Come on. Try it again. That would be my smoke detector. And I see a bunch of smoke going up. And I think it's just from the exhaust. I also don't have that clamp tightened down the whole way. It's just a crossover pipe, which should be all right, but I don't see any leaks. And I think I want to get it warmed up. So I'll try it again. Carburetor problems? Possibly. I don't really know what's causing this issue right now. I'm not liking it. runs. That was my number one concern with this bike build. Like I said, I bought it sight unseen, essentially just bought it knowing that it had issues and that it didn't run. Of course, the guy's like, oh, I ran when I parked it last. Okay. Anyways, couple of concerns that I have with it right now is, number one, it's misfiring a little bit, and it's also only running on like half choke, which leads me to believe that there's either a issue with air getting in between the carbs and the cylinder head, or there's issues with fueling, which is also something that needs addressed. Fuel is really old in the tank. My guess is the previous owner disassembled the carbs thinking that's what the issue was, no start, and jacked up the carburetors as well. I also need to take the fuel tank off, drain all the old gas, put in some good fuel in there. Also, I'm going to check inside the fuel tank to see if it needs cleaned out, rust removed, or if I need to line the tank with anything. Lots of work to be done, lots of episodes coming. Winter's here, and I'm not going to be doing much riding, if any, so I'll be doing this build, bunch of mods on my K75. This old girl needs a lot of love and attention, so I got my hands full. All right, I think that's it for tonight. I've done a lot of work on and off camera. The most important thing is she starts and she runs. A little rough, but we'll get there in the next few episodes. To recap, I removed this cover here. I installed a new spark generator. We cleaned some stuff up and put a new gasket on there. I also installed this oil temperature gauge and oil cap. I also did a complete oil and filter change on this, so those are fresh as well. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, engaging, asking questions, posting comments, and giving me your opinions on what I should do on this particular build. I also appreciate all of your support on my website, www.dadomadeshop.com. I have a little bit of everything for everyone. If you want to go check it out and support your boy, I'd greatly appreciate it. I kept making comments about waking up the neighbors, and while the bike was running during one of those clips, I hear somebody say, "Hey," and one of my neighbors ended up walking down and he was chatting with me. I really have cool neighbors here. We kind of live out in the middle of nowhere, and we do have neighbors, but I didn't think one was gonna walk down my driveway. He's like, "I knew it. It was probably either the Ducati or the Triumph that you got running, so I had to come down and see it." So we chatted for a little bit and caught up, and it was great. I'm excited that it's running. He's excited that it's running, and I hope you guys are excited as well, because I have a pile of parts ready to go on this motorcycle, and I'm super stoked to get this thing and ride it in the next one. Peace.